Welcome to Authentic Living with Roxanne, a place where we have conscious conversations about things that really matter in our lives. And now here's your host, Roxanne Durhaj.
Hi, everyone. It's Roxanne Durhaj of Authentic Living with Roxanne. Thanks for tuning in again this week. Today, I have a special guest, Maree Burgess, and she's in Australia. So we were talking. She looks so lovely when I look at her, and it's 6 o'clock there. I'm so glad that you took the time to get up this early to start your day a bit earlier to be with us today. So thanks for being here. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about Maree and her background, which is at the time we had set this up, we knew that there was an alignment, but obviously now with different things going on, we thought that there would be a bit more affinity to certain things that we can discuss. So she talks about team performance and organizational excellence being vital, and it's a must to engage people, projects, and change specialists. She's a trainer, coach, facilitator, author, and speaker who practically guides leaders and their teams to create the culture you desire, and importantly, they want to be a part of, which greatly moves performance. She has run her business since 2003. So that's quite a long time. So you've been doing this kind of work. What guided you to become involved in organizational consulting?
So it really, I've got a bit of an eclectic career because I actually started my working journey as a nurse in a major hospital here in Melbourne, and then decided to take 12 months off and work in an office so I could work normal hours and not work shift work. And of course, I never went back to, as you do, and I never went back to nursing because I just fell in love with the dynamic nature of being part of an organisation. And then my first experience of being part of teams that stayed together for a while, because when you're hospital trained and nursing, you're in teams that change every 4 or 5 weeks or even daily because you're all rostered on and stuff like that. So I spent a long time in the corporate world and particularly in banking, and realised after having children, and because I was working part-time, my role was getting narrower and narrower, and I couldn't understand why I was so unhappy, which I'd never disliked any job I'd been in. And, did some voluntary work within the organisation I was in at the time, learned some coaching, became part of, supporting their graduate program. And that's when I realised that I was actually doing the wrong thing. And basically what I wanted to do was start a coaching business, which has now morphed into training and facilitating. And the nice thing about that is it's not looking after the ill health of people, but it's very aligned to what I used to do as a nurse, which was to provide the best care and service that I could. So it's just become, it's not a natural progression, but it felt very natural for me to move into this sphere. And having spent a long time in corporates and being part of a lot of teams, I was always perplexed around why people got stuck in teams and they were very unhappy, or why leaders always, and still do, always have someone in their team pretty much that is perceived as difficult. And I just got really curious about that. So now I really specialise in how to help people create and be part of a team that they actually do want to be part of and actually enjoy going to work every day, even though they're not going to work at the moment because we're all working from home.
Yeah, so you're getting up, having your coffee, maybe your quick breakfast, and you're going to your office or your living room that you've reconfigured into an office, which is a change that a lot of people have had to make full-time. Myself, same thing. I worked a lot from home, but now, this is where I am full-time. So let's pivot back to what you talked about. Why is it that oftentimes teams have one or maybe two people that create such dissension that spins a team? Speak a little bit to that, because I'm sure most people, and I know I've been on many teams in my career where you could see it happening. Speak to a little bit about that and kind of what you know about that and what happens to people like that and how it impacts the teams.
Look, there's just such a range of reasons why people don't fall into sync with the team or are disenchanted. So it could be they've just been part of the organisation for a really long time and they're jaded and they've seen a lot of change, and it's almost like they're sitting there going, come on, we've seen this happen before, it didn't work then, why would it happen now? So there's a whole a lot of history around that. And I work with a lot of organisations that even now, with the turnover of people we have in organisations, there's some people that have been in organisations for decades. And if they don't stay fresh and have that love of learning, they become, as Carol Dweck calls it, has that fixed mindset, and they just can't see anything else. So that's troubling. But then you can have a lack of trust. And I've always been part of great teams and always been part of the teams I was part of, except for one team, which was late in my corporate career, and I couldn't work out why we weren't working. We just, we were nice to each other. It was very surface level stuff. But when I did dive into it and we actually could find out what was going on, it was because there was two people in that team that actually distrusted each other and really didn't like each other, but they smoothed it over. So other people in the team couldn't see that. And so there was never any authenticity. So I love the fact that you look for authenticity in leadership or help provide that, because if you don't have that, if you don't have trust, then you get cliques forming. So, and again, seniority has a lot to do with it. So you get all the bad behaviour that can occur when people are very junior because they don't realise the impact on the people around them. But as people get more senior, they can also behave really badly as well because they've all got their own agendas. As people, we're slippery little suckers, and we are not often open, authentic, transparent, and there's so much miscommunication. A whole heap of reasons.
And absolutely so. And to your point, I'm writing my second book on the topic of authenticity in leadership. And, when you kind of look at it, you look up to your leaders to be that guidepost to permissive behavior. And unfortunately, and I've been on teams, I was part of a hospital team where I was entering as the leader, and some of the behaviors on that team at time was quite infantile at best. But I think, some of it was the fact that leadership prior to allowed a lot of nepotism and, triangulation, and didn't resolve conflicts that kind of permeated the teams. And it really, I think that's a lot of teams, and I don't know if you would agree, sometimes if leadership does not intervene in a way that digs out, the root of the dandelion, the toxicity really gains momentum, right? And then a lot of people get away with bad behavior, they put up with bad behavior, all those things. So, when you're going into work with teams and you're going into an organization, Maree, how are you doing an organizational kind of snapshot of the teams you're working with prior to deciding to work with it? Or how do you kind of, how do you get brought into organizations to work with their teams?
Yeah, so look, there can be a range of reasons. And at the moment, because I have such a focus on delegation, because you're right, a lot of problems, there's two things we're really poor at. We're poor at having difficult conversations, and we're very poor at asking what if questions. And so people would rather avoid having a conversation with someone that perhaps is troublesome, or a couple of people who are not getting along, and just hope that it goes away. And it, as you said, it just festers and intensifies. And then that leader might move on to perhaps something more senior, or move on to another organisation, and a new leader comes in and they inherit that bad behaviour. And often that's their most challenging thing, because suddenly they've got to have conversations that they weren't expecting in their first 90 days of being in a role, because people just would rather avoid having that difficult conversation. So when I come into organisations, it's usually at the leader level where I'm doing one-on-one work with them, or, as you said, in teams. Sometimes, rarely, but sometimes I do work with whole organisations if they're sort of medium size. And the first thing I will do is, if it's feasible, it's not always feasible if there's too many numbers, but have one-on-ones with each person that will be part of whatever I'm doing, whether it's a 6-month program or even if it's a one-day workshop, to go, what's really going on. Because I guess I go in with a positive intent that I don't want to be seen as a fixer, because the toxic teams are the ones I don't want to work with, because they're the hardest to move. I actually love working with performing teams and going, how can you do even better? And often it's just a few tweaks. But yeah, during the one-on-one conversations, and usually they're only 20 minutes, but it's to find out what's the theme that's going around, because everyone's got their own individual stuff. But what's the theme going around for that team? And you either bring it out and give it air, or you give them some skills to do that themselves.
Right, because sometimes, like recently, I was doing a bit of consulting, and I was brought into an organization, but it was through a third party, and they like the CEO said, absolutely, bring her in. She has the expertise. We're willing to do whatever it takes, and senior management's ready, and we're just going to work with all our teams. And so I said, great. I said, so I wanted to do basically, and I'd reach out prior to the senior teams, had really good conversations. I know there was a lot of change and things that weren't done well. So of course, what unfortunately, as I got going, what the CEO didn't explicitly make her intentions made. She basically wanted to brush everything away. So here I am, I'm going in and talking to the teams about, okay, like, all right, so there's been a lot, and things aren't going so well, and things have not been done so well. However, where do we need to pivot to the future, giving them a bit of space to be able to air, because they've been told that's my role, but let's kind of bridge and figure out the next step to get out of the storm. People were, I would say they were quite forthcoming, but what ended up happening, it was unfortunately the reverberation of what the CEO wanted was, I don't like that they are bringing up things that they're contentious about, that's putting them in the past. But she couldn't recognize potentially that really, prior to making change, you have to allow people that voice. And I don't know if you would agree with that, Maree, to be able to say, this was cruddy, this was so horrible, and blah, 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 blah. And then eventually, as they went on, what happened is they kind of, I often say that the dissenters rise to the top when there's no more validity anymore, once they've been put on that stage. And what started to happen is eventually, the real core concerns came out, and the people that were just like, I'm going to say the 2% that just wanted to keep them there, eventually people kind of start to look at them for what it was, and they were ready to work. But unfortunately, the alignment between where the CEO, her perception of things and where things needed to go was out of alignment. So I didn't work with them full time. So
Yeah.
that's unfortunate at times, right? Because it would have meant a lot of work, long-term work, but regardless of what the employees and the teams had been through, they were willing to work.
Yeah. And look, that's the other thing, the person that says, come in and fix my team, but they actually then want to be hands off. Or you're right, they don't want to dive into, no, don't go back into the past, because we don't need to go there. Well, actually, yes, you do. You've got to get it out in the open. Right. It's going to cause angst and anxiety, but we've got to talk about this and then go, okay, time to move on.
Absolutely. Right. So I think, in retrospect, because it was a third party, I figured my due diligence, I'd shifted how I approach things now when there's a third party to make sure that I get the proper information that I need to prior to going in.
Yeah.
So obviously the basics that we know with teams is that they need to experience their team members as being transparent. And to your point about leadership, they also need to be able to experience that with their senior leadership that's running the team. So let's say that's in place, and let's talk a little bit more about your sweet spot or your super power, which is delegation, and talk about what are some of the core elements that leaders need to have or acquire to be a good delegator.
Yeah. So, research that I've done shows that 28% of us are actually trained in delegation, because it's just perceived as something that we can do. But when people actually really think about it, they say, actually, we're not that very good at it. And really does come back to there's a whole range of reasons. There's stuff going on for us around why we don't want to delegate from. My team are too busy. I don't know what to delegate. I'm fearful that if I delegate something, they will do it really badly. Or they'll do it so well that it'll make me look badly because it used to be my role. So there's a whole lot of fears that prevent people from delegating, or beliefs that they have around their team. Sometimes they just do because they think it's faster to just get on and do it. It takes too long to train people. And sometimes they'll try to delegate and the team will go, that's not my job, and they'll push back. And I guess my sweet spot is middle management. So I look at middle management leaders who are either new to leading a team and so have never had to delegate, and helping them understand what they need to do and how they need to do it, because it's more than just handing tasks over. There's all of these leadership components which we've touched on: authenticity, trust, communication, building relationships, and so on. One of the first things I get people to do, and I actually did this for the first time with a really senior leader a couple of years ago in an organisation who had stepped into a more senior role into the C-suite. And I was thinking, gosh, what will we start with? What will I do? And I thought, I know, we'll just work out what's on the plate for her first 90 days. That'll take the first 10 minutes and then we'll get into a good conversation. Well, 90 minutes later, we're still putting up things on her huge whiteboard around what was on her plate. And that's when I realized that we've got to look, and it was a matter of, and we didn't, it wasn't 90 minutes worth of this. It was actually, what about this? And tell me more about that. It was conversation as we went. And when we both looked at that list, it was then be able to stand back and go, actually, that is something I can park. That is something that doesn't need to be done for another 6 months. And the list became much more feasible. The other issue was there was no team in place to delegate anything to, so that had to be built up as well. So even doing that task audit, which is the first thing I get people to do, is sometimes enough to lighten the load or to make people to realise this is what I can pass on. And the things you can pass on are things that you don't need your absolute expertise to be able to do, but also understanding, because when people step up into a new role, they'll often keep doing the activities that they used to do in their old role because they could be part of the same team, because it's stuff they're really good at, and that's why they got promoted. And they find it hard to let go of what they're really good at, because then they feel threatened because they're doing stuff they're not so good at, which is leading. So it's helping them do that step up, and I call it right level management. So if a leader steps up but they're still operating here, they're pushing all their team down, so everyone's operating at the wrong level. And if it's throughout the organisation, that's a huge issue. So how to get them to step up and delegate the tasks that they used to do. So that would be my first tip, is to say, what is on your task list and what are you still doing that you shouldn't do? And asking yourself the question, if not, look at something you're about to do. If not me, who else could do this?
I like the concept about comfort, really, because if you're stepping up a level, we all like comfort and safety, to feel competent, if you think about it. But not thinking, if you're thinking of a leader, you're not thinking that they're struggling with that. But I'm thinking about in my leadership roles, I think I ran an addiction unit at a hospital as, one of my first management roles. And, I was quite young also, those types of things. But I worked with another leader, and he was so kind of lost in being liked that he did everything that his team wanted. So he went from being one of the team members to being the team lead. And I would look at it and I would say, but that particular filing situation is not that's your expertise and your value is being lost there, but he was, more interested in perceiving this as connection versus recognizing that in fact he wasn't showing people, the value of what he had been promoted to.
Which is sort of one of the other things I focus on, and in the white paper that I'm happy to offer people, which is a mindset audit, which is, what is it that you're doing that either you shouldn't be doing or that you have beliefs about? And one of them is, I often say that it can be so challenging to step up from within your team. So your manager or your supervisor had stepped up and left the peers behind because suddenly he's leading them, and he wants the relationships to stay the same, and they just can't.
Right. And I think, this part, we're thinking about it from an element. I think every level you go up, my perception is that you can't keep the connections in the organization. So I always say, you level up, then you have less connection, then you level up, and then you get to the CEO, where the CEO needs to go outside of the organization.
That's it.
Which is a lonely place to be, right? Because as human beings, ultimately, we know that you have the skill and the capacity and the personality and the acumen to do that role. But when you're up there and you're having a tough day, it's like, help, anybody. You can't go to the level under. You have to be able to, and that's where, senior coaching and executive coaching becomes very, very vital.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
It's a tough thing, and I've seen people go through it and they struggle because they're still wanting to maintain those connections, especially in smaller communities and things like that too, where you might see your managers or your SVPs at the hockey rink or the soccer field or whatever, and then you're still having to maintain that certain level of acumen even though you're outside of work.
That's right. And the number of people that I work with who go, but I used to be best friends with this person, we used to socialize together, and now this thing's happened, and it's because sorry, you've stepped up, you're now leading them, and you have to behave differently.
So let's talk a little bit about in this time, and I think we'd be a bit remiss to not acknowledge that being a leader is a subset of a skill that I think some people are just naturally come into it a little bit better, but obviously with skill and development and enhancement, people get it. But the shift in how we've, you're in Australia and I'm in Canada, and we're doing the same types of things. We're all having to manage from home. Yeah. So delegation virtually, let's talk a little bit about that. And what kind of thing, I'm just thinking it's probably a bit of the wild, wild west out there potentially for people that have never or haven't acted as teams remotely as their modus operandi. Yeah. So what are some of the things that you've heard or you've seen or you think that teams would be experiencing right now virtually with the element of delegation?
Yeah. And it's interesting when, so many organizations do previously worked flexibly and now absolutely have to. But working flexibly is like, you can work a day from home or you can work from somewhere else. Whereas now it is literally you're out of the office. And that has lifted the visibility of whether you're good at delegating or not, or what your leadership is like, or what your team is like. Because then a whole new range of fears come into place because people you used to be able to see every day, so you could actually see what they're doing. Now they're at home and you can't see it. And that's not to say, in fact, people are busier at home, I'm finding, than when they used to be at work, which I'll come back to. But suddenly people who were in the office and were perceived as pretty good at perhaps delegating and leading have lost that element of control, which is visibility of what the team are doing. And that raises a bit of fear. And then when we get a bit of fear from a neuroscience perspective, we get sort of cortisol entering our system, which makes us feel stressed. And then we start to operate differently. And then we get this domino effect of what's going on. So things that are happening out of the workplace, but while people are still working, are things like we've got people who used to walk out the front door and then travel to their office, so there was that commuting time, and they would be away from their family, are now working with their family, and all of the challenges that brings in if you've got young children, if you've got school-age children or children in secondary school or even college. Suddenly the dynamics of how you're working have changed just because you've got different people around you. And suddenly you have to sort of show that you actually do have a real job, because all they do is see you sitting at the computer and go, really, what are you doing? We can't play video games all day. The other thing that's happening is people are spending more time on video conferencing than ever before, which I love because they are getting that face-to-face thing. But again, there's research emerging that we get this cognitive dissonance happening, because when I'm talking to you on a computer screen, it looks like we're together, but we know there's this dissonance that actually we're not really.
Right.
And so that takes up bandwidth of our brain, which again is a bit exhausting. So people who previously could say, hey, Bob, tell me about the results from blah, 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 and they're sitting next to them, now have to set up, an instant message or set up a Zoom time to have that conversation. And so they're spending more time looking at a computer screen, talking to people. And they're starting earlier because they've lost their commute time and they're going later. And now because their computer is at home, probably always was, but now it's accessible so much. And they're used to working from that table in the lounge room or if they have an office. They're also doing, stuff at night when they may not have previously and stuff on weekends. So it's actually concerning for me from a health perspective that people are doing a lot more work, but they're also doing work that creates a cognitive load on our brain because we've got this dissonance about what's real and what's not. So that's, I think, a bit of an issue without even looking at all the people that have, which is sort of separate completely to what we're saying, but who have lost their jobs, and there's that added pressure of, will I have a job in a week if you do still have a job? So there's a lot of stress going on for people at the moment. And if leaders also have that stress of what are my team doing, they can easily fall into the micromanagement aspect of instant messaging all the time, checking all the time, how are you going with, because they're not seeing it, so they've got to check all the time. So it's putting stress on people. And so I try to go as quickly as possible. And now we're sort of 3 weeks? 3 weeks into social distancing. People now are falling into a rhythm. So now's the time to go get back into a work-based operating rhythm. Set your time of day that you're going to work. Make sure you have breaks and bring back some control in how you're operating. Set up a structure that might be the same or a bit different to how you used to work with your team. If you had a weekly meeting, have a weekly meeting. If you had daily stand-ups, still find a way to have those daily stand-ups. So try to recreate it knowing it's not going to be the same, and get back to some sort of normal operating rhythm, or put some rules around the fact of how you operate.
So that makes so much sense, right? Because I think you're right. Like it was, March 15th here, and then we were like a tumbleweed, to use your familiar kind of space. And now you're right, because people are just like, okay, we're calibrating. We know this has been 4 weeks in. We might have another 2 months to go. All right, okay, well, this is our reality, and people are learning things like Slack and Loom and Zoom and breakout rooms and all that stuff, and Zoom overload. So I would think, yeah, you're right, because that FaceTime was maybe there more often. So managers have to manage their stress and how they're coping, so that what they're filtering down to their teams.
Yeah.
And I would think on the employee end, and I don't know if you would agree with this, Maree, but also maybe the teams at home are worried about how they're being perceived about functioning. So maybe they're hyper functioning because they're concerned when everybody catches their breath and we go back and we start to look at the KPIs and stuff like that, will I be under the microscope because of how I functioned at home?
Yes. And look, I hope there's a lot of slack given for teams and people and individuals and leaders. When we get back to normal, who knows what getting back to normal even looks like.
Right.
Because we are I don't know about Canada, but here in Australia, we are absolutely going to go into a recession. Our unemployment rate is going to skyrocket. And so we have to have some forgiveness, because there could be even survivor guilt because people still have jobs. So
Absolutely.
that, there's a whole heap of things that we've got to make sure that we find ways to keep business going, because we absolutely have to, but also do it in a way that there's a lot of forgiveness in there as well. So yeah, look, I think performance reviews, maybe this is the year that we'll be able to get rid of them.
Woohoo! Everybody's probably thinking, everybody's like, oh no, performance review time. When you're in corporate, you're like, oh, okay, it's just a conversation, it's no big deal. But we know that nobody likes them.
No,
right? So
exactly.
maybe this would be the year of, okay, we're not going to have those. But I would see that, yes, absolutely, delegation would be the skill of the leader is being challenged as much as the skill of the team, and
Absolutely.
the state of the leadership and the teams and that relationship, whatever you kind of took in person and took at home, it it was it's in a space then that now you're like, all right, we had conflict, we had disagreements, we had unresolved concerns, all that stuff, but now we're not even seeing each other. And to your point, I'm reading you, Maree, but if I have an issue with you and I'm having to still kind of work with you and nobody was resolving it, and it's going to be harder, even more so, I would think, to work through it
Far
and say, all
easier
right,
to avoid, yeah, far easier to avoid that difficult conversation.
right, because I can kind of make sure that I'm kind of clocking in when you're clocking out. But now it's like, oh no, you have to be able to talk to Roxanne at least once a week to check this out, those types of things. So I think probably poses some difficulties, but also I'm going to say that on the flip side of things, it probably is teaching us a lot about what we're maybe not wanting to have dealt with before, we're being forced to deal with. So it's kind of like putting on our big girl pants and saying, okay,
Yeah,
I have to look.
I
We have to
absolutely,
work
yeah,
together. Yeah.
I absolutely agree. I think a lot of good things are coming out of this, and there's a lot of willingness to work together and to get on and do work. So it's absolutely not all doom and gloom, and there's some amazing things happening out there. And we keep saying change is difficult, and yet it seems like everyone's stepped into this new mode of reality and just getting on with it. So I'm really impressed.
I would think so, and I think it's a global issue. It's not, and then you look around and you see how much as communities, here, I'm sure as in Australia also, everybody's putting out little teddy bears in their windows,
Yes.
or the kids are doing chalk signs and all these phenomenal things, and it shows you the capacity that we have as human beings when we just de-stratify everything and just really look about, look, I'm safe, my family's safe, there's food, we have enough to be able to
There's
sustain those.
toilet paper.
Yeah, of all the ridiculousness we have to, and I think it is really bringing us to a point where really we see there's so much similarity with each other, and I hope that in turn plays in to the element that we're all in this together. We're all human beings, and we all have the same worries and the same needs and the same, things that make us happy and those types of things. So potentially, from a business perspective, I would hope that and I think it truly will have shifted us, because now we are looking at what's important.
Yes. And hopefully finding the stuff, going back to work, finding the stuff that actually we don't need to do anymore, and we can become more efficient.
Absolutely, absolutely. So for anybody out there that's saying they're a team, they've gotten their feet wet, they're out of the crises, and they're functioning, but the leaders wanting to kind of create a little bit more synergy in their teams. What kind of things would you say that would be some things that they could potentially look at implementing, maybe say a bit at a time in the next month?
Definitely look at their operating rhythm. How are they operating day to day, and what sort of boundaries have they put in place for themselves? Are they making sure they're staying in touch with all of their team? So just because someone seems to be absolutely fine and you can just set and forget, don't, because you do need to check in. Really look at that task audit and then go, there's so much here I don't need to do, because that's often the case, or there's so much here that I can give other people to do. Because I think we also, because again, we don't know how long this will go on, so we also want to be able to make sure that we're keeping people engaged and enthusiastic about what they're doing. So making sure that you're giving, if you are delegating, that you're giving them stuff that they're actually going to thrive with or learn from or be challenged by in a positive way. And just check in, how are they going? Because we've been talking about leading and leading teams, but it's also managing up. as well. So making sure that you're checking in with your boss, making sure you've got a line of communication and are operating rhythm with them, because they've got their own stresses as well. So no one has the answers, so look out for each other.
Yes, and I go back to communicate. Just like you're realigning the tasks, and at this level, how are you having that conversation, one step up or two steps up to ensure that there's alignment with how, that information is going up, but also coming back down, so that you could kind of look at really what are the unnecessary, we got to throw that stuff out and we probably should never bring it back. What kind of things do we have to be more relaxed about? And really, I think, at this point, it's more about, look, we're fine. We're doing well. Okay, these are the things that have slipped. What should we focus more on? And maybe what can we learn, right? So I think it's, in a way, you're being forced to have that ultimate work-life balance to some degree. I've been doing, work with clients, and somebody comes flying in the room and they say, hold on a second. Somebody's, TV show just went on pause and they had to go out and come back. So I think just having that whole sense of balance as much as we can, and accepting that, we'll get through this, and we're going to learn so much from it. So Maree, this has been fantastic. I think hopefully, I know I have learned a lot of things from today, and I'm sure that anyone listening has done the same. Now, for anybody that would want to have you speak or potentially coach with you for their leaders or even their teams, I know we're going to put a link to a white paper that Maree has written on a delegation, which I think will be a fantastic resource. Where can people reach you? And any last words of wisdom before I let you go?
Thank you, Roxanne. This has been a pleasure. We could be chatting for ages, I think. So yes, I'll give you the link for my delegation white paper. It's the 7 steps to go from doer to delegator. If people do want to find out more about developing their own delegation skills, or building that into their team skills, I do one-on-one coaching for leaders, but I also do team sessions, and that's now all online now. I have a half-day delegation workshop, or even a 90-minute webinar that gives people a good space. People can email me at Maree, which is MAREE @mareeburgess.com, and I'm sure the links will be in your show notes. And all of my other links with LinkedIn or Facebook or anything like that. And I guess my last tip would be, be kind. So we don't need bad behavior at this stage. So, just be kind to everyone that you're interacting with.
I like that. Just be kind. This, I say, so long as we, like each other, we get to know each other, which we're having opportunities to do. Trust comes, and with trust, what happens is that lots of things that used to bother us before, when you rebuild that relationship, we let so many things go, because you go, oh, I can see from a different light now. So that's what I talk about. It's about, be aware. How am I interfacing? Is there things that I'm doing that's bothering someone that I have to take responsibility for, to take those steps, to be able to think, I may not like this about this person, but what is it they might not like about me? And how can I maybe meet that person a bit further along, so that we can engage in a different way? And being at home, we all have more pressures, and to recognize that, because that person on the other end of that video is also doing the same kinds of things you are. So this is Roxanne Durhaj. Thanks so much for tuning in again. And Maree, for getting up at such a, I'm going to say ungodly hour, but it's probably close to the beginning of your day anyway. And if you're needing any information on mental health and wellness and authenticity, you can go to my website. It's roxannedurhaj.com. There's a link for a course that you could do on relationships, which will help you to better lead in whatever way that you need to.
Thanks for tuning in to Authentic Living with Roxanne, creating the space for positive, healthy change. Roxanne is a keynote speaker, psychotherapist, and coach. To work with Roxanne, visit roxannedurhaj.com/blueprint. We'll see you next time on Authentic Living with Roxanne.